Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive. You ready to explore the world of the Korean language today?
Always.
I'm excited to jump into this article called Discover Everything About Korean Language Today.
Yeah.
I think it's going to have some really cool insights, even for those of us who maybe think we know a bit about Korean already.
Okay.
So let's see what linguistic gems we can unearth.
One of the things that I always find interesting
Mm-hmm.
is how Korean often surprises people.
Yeah.
It's actually the 13th most spoken language globally,
Wow.
which is higher than a lot of people would guess.
Mm.
And get this, it's the 8th most spoken language right here in the U.S.
Really? Wow, that's amazing. Second only to another Asian language.
Yeah, right.
It really shows you the influence of Korean culture here.
Yeah, absolutely. And you can't really talk about the rise of Korean without mentioning the Korean wave,
Mm.
or Hallyu, as it's known in Korean. It's this global phenomenon.
Yeah.
And it's fueled by a lot of things like K-pop, K-dramas,
Yeah.
even Korean food. I mean, think about the global reach of groups like BTS, or how popular shows like Squid Game have become.
Yeah.
It's like a whole new generation has
Yeah.
been introduced to Korean culture, you know?
Yeah.
And that's really sparked their interest in the language, too.
It's fascinating to think about how Korean has evolved over time. Our article actually talks about its journey from the Stone Age all the way to the digital age.
Hmm.
That's incredible. It's
Yeah.
gone through all these distinct phases like Old Korean and Middle Korean, and each one has left its own mark on the language. And then, of course, there's that pivotal moment when King Sejong the Great introduced Hangul back in the 15th century.
Oh, yeah, that was a total game changer. Before Hangul, the main way to write Korean was using Chinese characters,
Uh-huh.
which you can imagine made it super difficult for the average person to become literate.
I can imagine, yeah.
King Sejong was so forward-thinking, though.
Yeah.
He knew that
Mhm.
a more accessible writing system would empower the people.
Right.
And that's exactly what Hangul did.
I find it pretty amazing how Hangul, with only 24 basic letters,
Yeah.
14 consonants and 10 vowels, can create over 11,000 different characters. It's really become a point of pride for Koreans.
Rightfully so.
Yeah.
It's incredibly user-friendly, too.
Yeah.
I mean, unlike those more complex character-based systems, like you see in Chinese, Hangul's designed so the letters actually visually represent the sounds they make. It makes it way easier to learn.
Wow.
Just brilliant design, really.
So the article mentions that there are 9 distinct dialects in Korean,
Uh-huh.
which I thought was pretty surprising.
Yeah.
And it makes you think about how North and South Korea, even though they share the same language, have developed these unique variations over time.
Yeah, it's really a reflection of their different cultural and historical journeys, and you can hear it, too.
Yeah.
Like in the intonation, the rhythm of speech.
Mm.
For example, the Gyeongsang dialect,
Hmm.
which is spoken in southeastern South Korea,
Yeah.
has a really distinctive intonation pattern.
No, interesting. And then you have the Jeolla dialect
Mhm.
spoken in southwestern South Korea, which also has a really unique rhythm to it.
It's so important to preserve these dialects. They carry so much cultural history. They
Ah.
really add to the rich tapestry of the Korean language and its heritage.
Okay, so we've talked about the history and the dialects, but what about the actual structure of the language itself?
Right.
The article mentions that Korean grammar follows a subject-object-verb order,
Right.
which is totally different from the subject-verb-object order we use in English.
Exactly.
Could you imagine
Right.
saying like, I kimchi eat instead of I eat kimchi?
It's a real mind bender for English speakers, that's for sure.
I bet.
And then there are these things called particles, which are, well, they're these tiny grammatical elements
Uh-huh.
that attach to words and basically give you more context about their role in a sentence.
That's fascinating how those little particles can change the meaning so much.
Yeah, they really do.
And of course, we can't forget about honorifics, which are like
Yeah.
a key part of Korean culture and communication.
Oh, absolutely. It's a system that shows just how much respect Koreans have for social hierarchy and relationships.
Yeah.
So the way you conjugate a verb, it doesn't just change with the tense,
Yeah.
but it also depends on who you're talking to.
Oh, wow.
Like if you're talking to an elder, someone in authority, or even just someone you want to show respect to, you'd use different forms.
So, like, if you were offering someone a cup of tea,
Oh.
that it's a close friend, you might use a more casual form of the verb.
Right.
But if you're talking to, say, your professor, you'd use a more formal one.
Exactly.
To show respect.
It highlights how language and social customs are all interwoven.
Yeah.
It's not just about conveying information. It's about expressing yourself appropriately in different social situations.
So now let's talk about vocabulary a little bit.
Yeah.
The article describes Korean as kind of a melting pot of linguistic influences.
It really is a real testament to Korea's history of cultural exchange.
At the core, you have the native Korean words, known as goyu.
Right.
Those form the foundation of everyday language.
Yeah, but over the centuries, Koreans borrowed a ton of words from other languages, most notably from Chinese. In fact, did you know over 50% of Korean vocabulary comes from Sino-Korean words?
Wow, I didn't realize it was that high.
Yeah. And you tend to hear those Sino-Korean words more in formal settings,
Uh-huh.
like academic contexts, kind of like using Latin-based words in English.
Oh, that makes sense.
And more recently, of course, we've seen a lot of loan words from English coming in,
Yeah.
especially in fields like technology, science, pop culture.
So interesting how all those elements, native Korean words, Chinese-derived terms, and modern English loanwords, they all just coexist
I know.
and make the language so rich and dynamic. Speaking of dynamic, we can't forget the Korean wave and its influence on language.
Oh, for sure. The Hallyu has really brought Korean
Right.
language and culture to the global stage.
Think about it.
I know, right?
K-pop lyrics have introduced all this new slang and expressions, and K-dramas often show you different regional dialects and the nuances of how social class is reflected in language.
It's not just entertainment either. It's like a window into Korean society and its linguistic landscape.
Right. And this whole surge in interest in Korean culture has also led to a surge in people wanting to learn the language.
Definitely.
The article mentioned that there's been an increase in enrollment in Korean classes at universities.
Yeah, I've seen that at my own university too.
Yeah.
But it's not just limited to classrooms anymore.
Oh, you're right.
Online learning platforms have made it so much more accessible for people to learn Korean.
It's like having a personalized language tutor right at your fingertips. No wonder. Korean is becoming one of the most popular languages to learn.
It's inspiring to see so many people embracing Korean language and culture.
Yeah.
So as we wrap up our little deep dive here into this fascinating language, let's just recap some key takeaways for our listeners.
Okay.
First off, I think it's important to recognize just how global the reach of Korean is. It's connecting people all over the world.
I agree. And we also can't forget the unique history and structure of the language. The invention of Hangul, the honorific system, all point to a culture that really values innovation and respect and social harmony.
Definitely. And the impact of Korean culture on the language. I mean,
Yeah.
it's undeniable. K-pop, K-dramas, even Korean food. Korean culture is making a global impact, and language is a huge part of that.
Absolutely. So as we leave our listeners to think about all this, what's one final thought-provoking question we can leave them with?
How about this? Now that you've learned a bit about the Korean language, what intrigues you the most? What do you want to explore further? Is it the story behind Hangul, the honorific system, or maybe even all that cool Korean slang?
Yeah, it's like we've given them a starting point for their own linguistic adventure.
Exactly. There's so much out there to discover about the Korean language. Who knows? Maybe our deep dive will inspire someone to start learning Korean.
I hope so. It's such a rewarding experience, and with all the resources we have nowadays, it's easier than ever to get started.
Learning a new language, it's not just about memorizing words and grammar rules, is it?
It's not.
It's about connecting with a whole other culture, expanding your horizons, becoming, well, a citizen of the world.
That's a beautiful way to put it. Well, on that note, I think it's time to wrap up our deep dive into the amazing world of the Korean language. We hope you enjoyed exploring it with us, and until next time, keep those language fires burning.